Welcome to Fundamentals of Macroeconomics. We are going to discuss the gross domestic product. We finally get to ask the big question: what is the economy? It's this big esoteric concept of millions of people engaging in transactions. The word, at least, comes from the Greek, oikos meaning house, and nemen meaning management. Therefore, oikonomia is the management of a household. We can split the economy into two broad measures: stocks versus flows. Take this picture of a reservoir. Behind this dam is a collection of water that has been accumulating for a long time. The entire volume in the reservoir is a stock, and then spilling over into the river is a flow. We measure the flow in terms of water per second, and we measure the stock behind the dam in terms of total gallons of water in any given moment. So a stock is a quantity that can be measured at any given point in time. For example, how many tractors exist in Pullman, or the total wealth in the economy. And we find wealth in the stock market, in owning a business, household ownership, storing cash and money at the bank, also in the ownership of machines and capital. Adding all of those assets up, we get the total stock of economic wealth. A flow is the quantity measured in an interval of time. So, how many tractors did we build this past year? Or how much new economic production did we experience? Gross domestic product is a measure of the new stuff in a given period of time. We can organize the economy in a circle. The first player is a household. They buy stuff. We call this consumption. They buy stuff in the goods and services market. The little rectangle now represents a market. Sometimes we call it the output market. This money goes to firms, but firms just don't sit on it. They need to pay their workers, as well as the owners. We'll measure that in total rents and wages. Now, workers themselves are in a market. We call this the input market. It's where we have the labor market and the capital market, where the suppliers and demanders of labor meet up. That money ends up going back to the household in the form of an income. See here, we have the great circle of the economy. But Dad, don't we eat the antelope? Yes, Simba, but let me explain. When we die, our bodies become the grass, and the antelope eat the grass. And so we were all connected in the great circle of life. The economy is a flow. Money keeps going around and around and around and around for infinity. Households buy stuff. Firms get that money and they pay their inputs. Businesses are owned by households. The money goes back to households and it just keeps going around. We can complicate this a little more. Households don't necessarily consume everything. They also save. And that savings goes into the financial market. So this will be savings for banks, savings in the stock market, buying government or corporate bonds. And again, the banks just don't sit on that savings. They create loans. Loans go towards businesses, and that's how they finance themselves. So far, we have two players interacting in three different markets. It's where firms are the suppliers and households are the demanders. It's where we get all our final goods and services. And again, often is noted as the output market. It's kind of the end goal. On the other side, the input market, firms now demand the labor and capital, and households are the suppliers. It's kind of a mirror of the output market. Let's get a formal definition for GDP. GDP is calculated by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, or the BEA, and their description is as follows. A comprehensive measure of U.S. economic activity, GDP measures the value of the final goods and services produced in the United States, without double counting the intermediate goods and services used to produce them. Changes in GDP are the most popular indicator of the nation's overall economic health. Notice it says simply the most popular, not that it is the only one. And as we'll see in this whole video series, GDP is very useful, but has important limitations. GDP includes almost everything in the market economy, from honey to butter. And the first issue in adding it up is the question of units. Like, you can't just add up the number of honeys and the number of butters. I guess we could use gallons, but I mean, a gallon of butter is not the same thing as a gallon of honey. What about the toast we put them on? I mean, I guess you could stuff the toast inside of the bucket as well. We convert it into the common unit of measurement, the market price. It's just the sum of price times quantity for all the transactions of final goods in the economy. And this brings us today to approximately $27 trillion. Let's summarize their description into one sentence: the market value of the final goods and services produced yearly in the country. GDP includes everything produced in the formal market. So that means non-market goods are not included. Not that they don't have value, we don't care about them, it's just they're hard to measure and so they're not included. For example, if you go to a restaurant and pay a cook for you, included in GDP. If you pay a maid to clean your house, included in GDP. But when you cook at home, the value added on top of the groceries is not included in GDP. And if you sweep your own floor, also not in GDP. We only look at the final goods and services. We're primarily concerned about double counting. Used cars were already counted once when they were initially produced. And intermediate goods get counted inside the final product. So if you're a baker making a cake, you need to buy sugar and flour. But then you put that sugar and flour together with other ingredients, turn it into a cake, and then the customer is buying those same sugar and flour molecules, they're just in a different form. The D in GDP stands for domestic. We are only looking at goods and services produced within the borders of a country. It doesn't matter who owns it. If Honda, a Japanese-owned firm, has a factory in Alabama producing vehicles, those vehicles were created inside of Alabama and therefore are included in GDP. But if Ford has a factory in Mexico, the value of the truck produced there is not included in our GDP because it happened outside. This is why we subtract imports in our calculations of GDP. And then finally, GDP is a flow, so we need to specify the time frame. The convention is to use the past 12 months. How many new goods and services were produced in the past year? BEA releases this data every quarter, 4 times a year. So that's the general definition of it. In the next video, we'll get to a framework for how they go about and calculate it.